Angelo, White Fragility. So stay tuned.
Your mic wasn't on for that, but hopefully it heard you through your computer because we're not live yet.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you live on here? Okay, but I didn't have your mic.
Yeah, I didn't have my mic on here either, so it doesn't make a difference.
Okay, all right. We ready to roll?
I'm ready.
All right.
Welcome to United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America on 100.5 and 790 News Radio WSGW and online at WSGW.com. Here is your host, Kareem Bowen.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. We're continuing yet another week. We're going to continue with our conversation on White Fragility, the book by Robin DiAngelo, foreword by Michael Eric Dyson. For those of you are listening to this conversation, you can get this actually at your Barnes & Noble. I would recommend this is a very good read for whomever, if you're Black, white, Puerto Rican, Asian, doesn't matter. But it talks about the dynamics of race as it relates to the power structure or the situational structures in America. Robin is a white woman who has written this book based upon her experience and her research on issues of race and dominance in the United States. And so we're sharing this book because I think we have to have these rough conversations, these tough conversations. And through these conversations, we are able to be enlightened and, empowered, and we understand a great deal more about who we are. I'm in the studio today with my main man, my producer, the Rob Father. Why don't you give a shout out to the people, Rob?
Hello, United Shades of Gray audience. Rob Father here. Happy to be here. Happy to see you here, Kareem. Let's get started.
All right, we're going to get into this conversation, but you know how I started. I want to talk about what's hot off the press. So we're going to get there first, and let's talk about a few things that are really on my mind, and I'm going to get into this conversation because an hour goes by so fast. All right, so this week we're continuing. We're going to look at chapters basically 6 through 8, and there's a couple of chapters that I'm going to focus. I'm really going to focus in on chapter 6 and a little bit of chapter 8, and we'll get to those in just a second. But what's hot off the press on today? I had an opportunity, Rob, to speak with, or not to speak with, to watch. I was watching the U.S. Senate case that they have with the gymnasts from the United States gymnast team.
Right.
And I was just looking at this entire thing, and I was horrified by the handling of this case. These young women who are experts and great gymnasts who put their heart, blood, sweat, and tears on the mat. And we're, have people that are supposed to protect and to make sure that they're okay, taking advantage of them. And what's really crazy about this entire situation, I am a Spartan, tried and true. I bleed green and white. But Michigan State has a key place in this entire conversation, seeing that he was a part of that, the university there. But this Jerry Nasser situation has been absolutely horrific. I was listening to the testimony and I had heard about it, but I hadn't had an opportunity to just really sit in and to listen.
Right.
And I was really just kind of upset. I lean in for women and as often as I can as it relates to issues, working with the women over at the Underground Railroad, domestic violence, talking about toxic masculinity, all of the issues that are important to our culture, so that we can lean in for women, because I think that with such a misogynistic society and everything, just being based upon sexuality, we see women being hypersexualized in a way that really puts them in danger. And I'm going to talk about that hypersexuality in a minute as well. But when we look at systems such as the United States Olympic team, and we think that these individuals or the workers and the staff of these have been vetted and really just because they're good, they get to go there. it doesn't seem like we've done enough to protect these women, but I saw these Olympic gold medalists. This is what's crazy. These women have represented our nation at the highest level of sports. They are a symbol of what America is. They put so much effort into these perfect and these flawless routines on the mat or on the beam or whatever it was. And they've won gold medals. And we see them. I sat there and watched them and their body language as they were in, the briefing room, and they were talking with the senators. And I just could not believe how powerful and strong they are in their sport, but you could still see the vulnerability in the moment with them having to deal and live through yet another round of testimony. And so I was pleased to see that there are some things that they're putting in place, like making sure that these women only have to tell these stories once, but this entire case was botched. And you cannot tell me, Rob, and this is just me talking, but this is, hey, we're going to keep it really straightforward. You cannot tell me that this one man alone was able to abuse all of these women and there was no assistance. Well, we see that there was some assistance because the way that the investigation took place and the way that they had individuals, men come in and say, hey, this really wasn't that bad. That this is not, I don't believe this is an isolated event. And I hope that the U.S. Olympics and the gymnastics team is really taking a look into this, because it seems to me that he may be the fall guy, but there are other systems and individuals. Larry Nassar, you're right. Larry Nassar. He may be the fall guy, but I think that in order for this to be so pervasive and for this to be in position and in existence for so long, and these women trying to tell their story, and it seemingly almost is a cover-up, that there's more to the story than what we're seeing. And I hope they really do an extreme investigation on this whole thing. What are you going to say, Rob?
Well, I was going to say not just women, but some men too. But you're right.
Absolutely.
It's not the only. I refuse to believe that Larry Nassar was the only one. Someone else knew something undercover. And I'm glad this is brought to light, because now nationwide and worldwide, we can look more into this whole situation. We put our children in the trust of these sports experts, and we expect them to be vetted accordingly. We don't expect them to be, molested or sexualized or things of that sort. Coaches, medical staff, whatever have you, we put our trust in them. And it's sad when it comes back to see that, one of them was a bad apple and decided to do what he or she decided to do,
Yeah. So our hearts and prayers go out for those young women who, once again, just this year, they a number of them were on the team again this year, and they represented the United States well. So we say thank you for all that you do. Our hearts and prayers are with you through this process of recovery. Being violated sexually, physically, whatever, is never an easy thing to overcome. And sometimes it carries a lifelong stigma and emotional issues that we have to deal with for the rest of our life. So I imagine and I pray that you have the support that you need. I thank you all for being such strong women, not only physically strong, but they were emotionally and mentally strong through this process.
Courageous.
Yes, courageous as they continue. You all are superheroes. You are the Wonder Women that we love to support. So we want to say, I just wanted to bring up and make sure we talk about that. Now, on to other news. California and the recall of their governor, Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom. This has been going on. So finally, we have a definitive answer. He has been able to beat off the recall efforts by the GOP. But what's interesting is, I asked myself, what put him in this position? And it was really because he took a strong stance as it related to COVID and the coronavirus and the mask mandates and shutting down restaurants and things. I don't know if you've ever been to LA and how much time you've been to LA.
Yes.
So you understand that there are certain districts in LA that are all about restaurants. It's restaurants, nightlife, even more so than big business in certain sections.
Right.
So I can imagine that he really ticked off the population, by closing restaurants and putting limitations on people that were in there and bringing back mask mandates when this was not a popular thing, because restaurants really suffered during this pandemic. But it's interesting to see how he has, there's a gnat in the studio that's driving me crazy. It's interesting to see how he was able to defeat this recall effort. And I would say that the two reasons would be the issues with COVID. Now, he did make some serious missteps as it relates, because I think that if you are going to set a standard, you've got to be willing to live up to the standard.
Right.
And so shame on him for being seen at a restaurant when he is encouraging everyone else to not be in restaurants and to wear a mask and all these other things. And he was seen maskless at a restaurant for an event that he was with his family. So that was one of the issues that caused a lot of people to say, listen, this is not cool. You are not being fair. What's going on? But then the other issue is the issue with the wildfires. And, we mentioned this before, and I don't know if it was on this station or if it was on the other show, Rob, that there are some serious issues that we need to really consider as it relates to global warming and the impact of a warming Earth. And we see that this year we've had more wildfires that have burned more acreage, 1.9 million acres almost, wow. I think they said, in wildfire damage. So these things are very important for us to have to handle and to manage. But over the past 17 years, we've had the 17 hottest seasons and most active seasons as it relates to wildfires. So it's not the most 17 over the, of the top 20. This is the top 17 hottest summers as it relates to wildfires. So we've got to begin to stop talking about is climate change real? Just kind of look at the data, look at the fact that our polar ice caps are melting, look at the fact that our weather is changing, all of these things. Did you ever see the movie 2012?
Yes.
Okay.
At least twice.
I have it on Blu-ray, DVD, and VHS. I mean, I loved the movie 2012.
Back then, it was a strong exaggeration, but it's a real possibility. You never know.
Absolutely. And so when we were talking on last week, we brought up the idea, you brought up the idea of the solar showers that were coming through and the solar wind. Right. And I went back and I spent some time looking at that. And they were like, this could be a real event to where a large portion of the world be knocked out from, having internet services. So the moment we become disconnected, that means, think about how many things we now have that are broadband or Wi-Fi related. We're talking about our connectivity. We're talking about our security systems. We're talking about some mobile features are now Wi-Fi.
Our storage systems in the cloud.
Our storage systems, our cooling systems, everything that we have now is so connected and interconnected with computers and the space, the cloud. That my grandmother, I told my grandmother, she said, well, where did my pictures go? I said, Grandma, they're in the cloud. And she started looking at the cloud. How they get up there? I'm like, girl, it's a way of transferring digital information. And she thought that was so interesting. But anyway, so we've got to begin to make some serious efforts towards mediating what's going on, because we won't have a world left to deal with. So we need to make sure that we do. But I think that the way that they won this, so when looking at Gavin Newsom again, I looked at what he did, and he made it a referendum on Donald Trump. He made it an issue on, listen, we're not even going to talk about who, whether or not I should be impeached, but look at, and I can't remember the guy, I used to watch him on Fox News as a African-American gentleman.
Larry Elders.
There you go, Larry Elders. And so he was really the top person on the Republican side that would be the person that would be on the ballot if they were going to replace Mr. Newsom. And it was interesting because Larry Elders, it's funny because I've agreed with some things that he has said, and then some things as of late have been so far right. I'm trying to figure out like what planet did he get sucked up and sent away to. But he had already started talking about campaign fraud. I hope that America begins to understand something. When we talk about a democratic society, and this is why I wanted this to be hot off the press, when we talk about a democracy, a democratic society, in the United States being the largest democratic society that, is bringing democracy to the world, we have to understand that democracy requires that we respect the institutions that exist. It is that we respect the fact that we have fair elections, that we respect the fact that when a loser loses, you don't start saying cheater, cheater, pumpkin eater, but you respect the fact that the people have spoken and you move forward. The foundation and the existence of a democracy, that is the essential part of it. And I see a lot of people, this entire agenda of, and I'll call it right-wing media, because it's not, I hate to say that it is the Republican Party, All of these people are a part of the Republican Party, but this is not the Republican Party that I remember. It is this new move of the Republican Party. Well, I don't know, the new right Republican Party, I guess, that are all about, conspiracies, and they're about, this is a cheat and this is fair and this was stolen, and they don't realize the thin strand or the thin balance that democracy rests on, and it requires all of us to be able to say that this is fair, that I accept this defeat, and we're going to move forward. Now, there's something else that's going to be taking place on the 18th. By the time this airs, we may have another whole situation that has emerged as it relates to the support for the anarchist attack for January 6th.
Right.
I don't understand it. But anyways,
that's what's scheduled, so to speak.
That's what's scheduled. And so they are beefing up security, putting up fences, thinking that I don't think that this is going to turn into that. I certainly hope not. Because if we do, our nation is truly at risk. All right, so let's get to this the last thing, the American Music Awards. Now, we're going to differ, I know, on this for sure. I say to you all the time, those of you who are listening, I'm not a Black Republican. I'm not a Black Democrat. I would, if you had to say, I guess the majority of my votes have been toward a Democratic leaning. I have voted Republican. I consider myself an independent. I'm going to vote on the issues that are most important to me and my community. All right. So I am a conservative. I believe in gun rights. I believe in it. I have firearms. So I am a conservative. I believe that I don't like
you're more moderate.
I'm a moderate conservative, but I consider myself my religious, and a lot of that is because of my religious beliefs.
Right.
So I am I don't want to say a Bible toting Christian, but I am a believer in Christ. I have a strong religious sense. I believe in family. I believe that the family unit is one of the most important units on the planet. So I have a lot of values as it relates to that. But then I believe that women should have people going to do what they want to do. Women should have the right to do with their bodies that they want. Just as an individual has the right to deny a COVID vaccination, a woman has a right if she wants to do an abortion. If that is your right and that's what you decide, that is your right, because we cannot force people into our boxes of conformity to say that this is right or this is not right. Okay. We are a free society. Now, I'm saying all of that to get to this point. The American Music Awards. Was it the American Music Awards?
The MTV video.
MTV Music. It's all the same thing.
I don't watch them, but I hear certain things.
Oh my gosh. I saw them, Rob, and I know that you're a fan of Lil Nas X.
Yes, I am.
And so he came in looking like a rebirth of Richard. What's his name? Richard. What's the guy that's from the back then? Richard. Ooh, you know what I'm talking about, Rob. Little Richard. Little Richard. He came looking like a throwback of a mix between Little Richard and Prince in this lavender suit, masculine on one side, feminine on one side, the cuts in the way. And it was interesting. But what I really want to talk about, and I say that because I know that you're a fan of Lil Nas X.
You're trying to push my buttons, but my buttons can be pushed, baby.
I'm not trying to push any buttons on today.
I'm just teasing you.
But what I do want to say is I'm just curious as to what the listeners, those of you who hear this, what did you think about these performances? One is I almost feel like I am literally beginning to date myself, because I was sitting here, I had to go and research some of the people that were performing. I was like, oh, Normani. Oh, she used to be with the group Fifth Harmony that Simon Cowell. So I'm like, okay, she's a very talented young woman. Megan Thee Stallion, all of these different artists. And I'm sitting here like going, what was the other young ladies? But their names. And so I was sitting there and like, good music. This is the thing that bothers me, Rob. And this is why I brought this up. These women are super duper talented. And they have lyrics, they got bars, they got voices, they got harmony, they can dance, triple, quadruple threats. However, we now live at a time that we think that the only way that we can value their talent is if they are half naked on the stage. Now, I've seen Risque. We've seen Risque. We saw Madonna. She came out with her butt hanging out this particular the MTV Awards. It was the MTV Awards with her. And I think she probably has had some augmentations. If that's what you want to do, Mad, you can do what you want to with your money. But what'd you say?
Implants.
Implants. Yeah. So
Prince.
Imprints.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
At some point way back then.
And Prince.
Right.
Okay, you were saying and Prince, right. I was talking about her implants in her behind.
I don't know about implants for her,
but I was just sitting there thinking, like, is this what we really, and I know that the progression, because I could think and remember my parents saying to me, I can't believe they let all of this on TV. Well, now they literally are dancing on stage half naked. I think Normani, who is a super duper talented, her song with Sam, it wasn't Sam Cooke, Sam, whatever his name, Sam, he this new guy from Britain, and I can't think of his last name right now. Amazing talent, and I love him, and I listen to a lot of his music.
Sam Smith, you mean?
Sam Smith.
Yes.
I love Sam Smith. Great voice, amazing voice. Her song with him, Dancing with a Stranger
With
or
them.
Alone, whatever it is, the duet that they did together.
Sam Smith, them.
Okay. Yes.
The pronoun thing, you know.
I use them, her and him together, them. They're sung together with them. It was amazing. And it hit 1 billion downloads in the matter of a week,
right,
which was historic and a record in and of itself. And so these people are very talented. I don't understand why we have come to a place that we think that the only way that we can be popular is to be naked. And she got
sex sells or whatnot.
Sex sells, but I think we are pushing the boundaries of sex. We're almost pornographic.
You're aging yourself, because
I am.
Back in the day, that was not the thing. People were more apprehensive and prudish about sexuality. Sexuality is coming more open now, and so people feel more freely.
And I think that's the problem.
To appreciate sexuality, not necessarily to push it in your face, but to appreciate what it is.
Well, it's the way that it's done, and I think that taste is very important when it comes to sex and sexuality. We've seen, all of these artists and things, they appreciated and they depicted sex and sexuality in a real form. But a woman grinding on a man who's strapped to, or a woman grinding on another woman, this is a rebirth of what Janet Jackson did a while back, on a stage with very, little on. I didn't like it when Janet did it back then. And she's from my era. Mm-hmm. And I think it's equally offensive now. And what bothers me is that these women have so much talent, but their talent is being overlooked because of their sexual exploitation.
Well, the music itself, the lyrics itself, it implies a lot of that stuff. So all they're doing is taking what's in the lyrics that you hear on the radio and TV and put it on in front of you on TV.
Prince wrote about the same things, but we never saw it visually in his performance. We saw some semblances
after
of
Prince
things.
found religion, because Prince was the butt.
Even before, I remember Prince back from the B-side, so I'm a Prince head. But I just wanted to bring that to the conversation. Okay. I think that's very important. But let's begin. I think morality and family, like MTV used to be about a younger generation being exploring music and entertainment for the first time. But I
was
think
there on day one.
We have now an NC-17 rating on MTV, and it was just sad to me to see that the music no longer speaks for itself.
Right.
And so that was the point that I was making there. We're going to come and we're going to get into our conversation today, going through chapters 6 through 8, talking about white fragility. Chapter 6 is going to be about anti-blackness. I want to focus in on that particular chapter. Chapter 7. We'll talk about racial triggers for white Americans. And then chapter 8, we'll dig into the result, which is white fragility. And it's interesting because I want to share when we come back at the top of the section. I had a real conversation with a white friend of mine. He's actually my uncle's friend, probably early 50s. We had a real conversation and he brought up COVID and we got into the conversation about race and prejudice and hate. And so we had a really interesting conversation. It got very heated at one point, but I want to give him a kudos and a super duper shout out. Brian Ballard, you are the man. He suffered through the conversation. We came to a place of understanding, and conciliation, to where we were able to really kind of talk through some things and really begin to see. And hopefully those of you who are listening to me out there are going through that same process. Hopefully you're offended initially, and maybe aggravated and frustrated, and that leads you to a place to dive in and to listen to the conversation so that we can come to a conciliatory place that we can begin to build on that foundation. I hope that as we continue, you guys realize something. I'm not here just to ruffle your feathers, but I'm here to push you out of your comfort zone. I'm here to help us to move past, because we're not really building relationships and friendships if we can't talk about these tough conversations. All of this is just make believe. And the moment that we're put in a situation like we were a few years ago, we'll run to our polar opposites and we will never come together. So I want you guys to stick and stay, listen to this conversation as we move forward with more conversations on race in America. We'll be right back with more United Shades of Gray.
United Shades of Gray will continue on WSGW. You're listening to United Shades of Gray on WSGW.
Hey, this is your guy, Kareem Bowen here. We're going to continue our conversation on United Shades of Gray. We're getting right into the thick of things that we're talking about here on today as we talk about anti-Blackness. We're continuing the book, White Fragility with Robin DiAngelo. Go out and grab a copy of it, dissect it, get into this conversation because initially I wanted to bring in people each and every week, but I said, why not have the conversation and then we bring the experts in and we'll begin to have a more informative conversation at the end. And so I'm excited to have that. And I've been lining up the dream team to have this conversation. I think that you guys are going to be impacted by this conversation. So I want to get right into the book, but Rob, as I told you before break, two things that I need to share. The first thing is I had an amazing conversation with someone who is they're a Republican. They're, I think, a little bit right of center Republican, right of center when it comes to the Republican lane. Yeah. And it's a friend of my uncle's, and he's a really good guy. First of all, I want to say that I think he is a good guy. And I think that, he, in his eyes, he's not a prejudiced individual or anything of that nature. He's definitely not a person of hate. And so we had this conversation. We were sitting there and talking. I hadn't seen him in years. And we were there and he started talking and he's just like, oh, this COVID stuff is just retarded. It's stupid. It's nothing more than the flu. And I asked him the question, how many people do you know that have died from it? And he said, well, no one, because it's not that bad and people are exaggerating. I said, well, I guess that my cousin that just died a few months ago, in January, and this person who died, I started naming off people that were dying. I said, the reason you want to get back to what you consider normal is because it has not impacted your community. And I said, that is a very selfish way to look at things, because my perspective as Americans is I look at 9/11 as what we should be as a nation. When there's a crisis in our nation, the best of ourselves, comes to the top, and we come together and we work together to overcome whatever that enemy or that evil is.
Right.
And so we continued the conversation. We got into the conversation about white supremacy and what that meant, white dominance. And so we ended up having a conversation about the book, and it got very, very, very heated. And I thought on several occasions, I wasn't angry, I wasn't yelling, but on several occasions, I just was very honest with him about how I felt about those things, and that, we live in a culture that is trying to emerge from systems of white dominance. And until certain things happen, we'll continually live. And one of those things was that white America must realize that there's a privilege that exists from the systems that existed from slavery that has never been overcome. And in order for us to truly be equal and equitable and diverse, we've got to deal with those issues. And we had such an amazing conversation. And once again, Brian, you get another shout out, Brian Ballard, an amazing conversation. We stuck it out. We were able to come to a very good understanding of one another. And I got it over here, my man. Thanks. Oh, okay. Yeah. No. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys are seeing that. But Brian Ballard, your amazing conversation. Thank you. And I told him, I said, you know what? I want to tell you that I have become more fond of you and I respect you greater for being able to have that conversation. He was like, you know what? I guess I never looked at certain things that way. And so we get uncomfortable. And after we get uncomfortable, what are we going to do? Are we going to run and hide our heads in the sands? Or are we going to be able to research? And I shared to him, I said, being, non-racist isn't enough. This is the famous Angela Davis quote. I think I may even shared it on last week. And I said, Brian, I don't think that you have a racist bone in your body. There are some things that you don't understand. We all have biases. We talked about that. I said, but being non-racist isn't enough. We've got to be anti-racist. Right. And what that means is you have to now understand where we are and decide this is what I'm going to do to fight for the cause for equity, inclusion, and diversity so that we can change the system. And I said, and one of the ways you're doing that is by immersing your children in a culture that is much more diverse. And they're spending time with Black kids, and you're showing them that there's no difference in color and showing them that they can love and really fight. And I think that he's one of those guys who is a sincere, genuine person who loves as a friend, a dear friend, and almost like family, my uncle. But even in those situations, we have to understand that just because we love, we can't forgive and understand that things are equal, but we've got to do something more. And so he understood that. And I thought it was an amazing conversation. And so hopefully we can mimic those conversations here at the station through our conversations here. And the other thing is, Rob, we were going to go live on last week But after last week's show, and some people might be excited about this, but after last week's show, I was banned from Facebook for hate speech or conversation that was not considered peaceful, if you would. And we were talking about the conversation we were having here on this book that was written by a white woman concerning white America. And I thought it was a great tool for us to have conversations, since this is Conversations on Race in America. I could easily go to a Black audience and speak and have these conversations, and they be well received because we have lived the struggle, so to speak.
You're speaking to the choir, too.
Absolutely, speaking to the choir. And when we went to the radio station here and we talked with the powers that be, that was one of the things I said. We're having these prolific conversations, which I think are great. I said, but we're speaking to the choir. And I think that we need to have a conversation, and it's going to be hard. So understand, those of you who are hearing this, I realize that I signed up for something that is not PC in America. That's something that is not well received, and something that is a hard conversation. But I major in doing the hard thing. So I don't have an issue with that. But I got banned from social media for 30 days. They gave me that good old President Trump ban. I am banned. So I'm in good company.
Trump's got a life ban.
Yeah, he's got a lifetime ban. I'm not trying to go for lifetime. But I was banned for 30 days. And so some of you, I'm having to share this from my other platforms on here, or you can go to WSGW because they haven't been banned from this conversation. You can tune into this conversation weekly. But I thought that was worth sharing. All right, so let's get to the conversation on anti-Blackness. And I want to read a little bit in this book because I think that hearing the author's words shapes the conversation in a way, Rob, that it people can be offended, but this is not two Black men, trying to make the world angry and trying to create a system of hate, because these are our white sisters' words, right? Right. And I use that term all the time because you, my brother or sister, based upon your belief and your understanding and your desire for us to love and to move forward in life. It don't really matter what color you are. Although I see your color. Okay, let's keep that in mind. All right, so anti-Blackness. It says racism is complex. This is on page 89 for those of you who may have the book, chapter 6, and it talks about anti-racism. And it says that racism is a complex nuance and in its manifestations and are not the same for every group of color. To challenge the ideologies of racism, such as individualism and colorblindness, we as white people, she's a white woman, must suspend our perception of ourselves as unique and or outside race. Exploring our collective racial identity interrupts a key privilege of dominance. I'm going to say that one more time. Exploring our collective racial identity interrupts a key privilege of dominance. The ability to see oneself only as an individual. We need to discuss white people as a group, even if doing so jars us, in order to disrupt our unracialized identities. Now, that's deep. That is really deep. And the reason I wanted to repeat that piece was because oftentimes we want to individualize racism for the individual. I am not racist. And I'll tell you, and I'll explain to you what I meant. I had a number of friends that I grew up with, because I grew up right here in Carlton, Michigan, and I had friends who we would do things where I would come around and we would get along, and their parent or their grandparent would be like, they would say the N-word or whatever the situation was, and they'd be like, that makes me so mad. I'm not racist. And, I don't know why they're that way, but I'm not racist. And so they wanted to make it about the individual. And so as I talked to them, I said, I'm glad that we have great relationships, and that's where everything starts, with a single relationship. But the fact of the matter is, I need you to look at the whole picture. You don't understand what I go through because you're looking at us as individuals, but you need to look at the collective. Exactly. You're here, but there are other people that really don't like who we are. Right. And if that is the case, and the collective still has elements and are operating in these systems, then you could fully never understand what it means when you say that I don't see color, I am not racist, I judge people on not by the color. You're missing the entire point. And so the author here makes this concept of anti-Blackness and the fact that when white America looks at race as a collective, you've got to be willing to do it as a collective. You see that, individually, you may have pockets or individuals that aren't doing these things, but when you look at the collective, you then get a clearer picture of how race is situated in America. And then you can begin to understand some very key things. I want to go over to the next page. She says, while people of color share some experience of racism overall, there are also variations based on specific groups' history. One of the key contexts that we got to keep in mind when we have our today's conversation is the fact that wherever I go, Rob, I take my personal history. Right. So when we talk about race and we're talking about racial expression and we're talking about supremacy and these types of things, white dominance, we have to consider a group's history, not an individual's history. Well, I was raised this way and I was told this and I have never. No. What is your group's history? And you got to understand that when I come into a place, even though there may be individuals who do not feel that way, or even the entire group doesn't feel that way that I'm experiencing or relating with, I am coming into that room with my personal group's history.
Well, to break it down simpler, it's like where you come from the community or from your family.
Absolutely.
You represent your family. You know, the whole Bowen family, you may not be fine, but you still come from that family. So what did we say about the other members of your family?
Absolutely. And that's kind of where I was going to go with this, Rob, because we have to take into account that even all of our experiences are different. Now, I want to share this piece of information with people who are listening. I grew up in a community that was not. I grew up in a community that was predominantly white, in most cases, and I think I may have said this at the very beginning of when we started these conversations. I was the only white that was on the National Honor Society, only black, excuse me, the only black that was on maybe the not National Honor Society, but the student council. I was the only black to do this. I was the only black for, and it was something that I had to learn to deal with and cope with. Okay. Right. But so many of my friends individually looking at me, I was not a threat. I was not an issue. I wasn't the person that was on TV that was committing the crimes because we had an individual relationship with me. But they could never understand why I did not feel comfortable going into certain spaces. Mm-hmm. And the reason I did not feel comfortable going into certain spaces was because even though I had individual relationships that were good with a number of my friends, and their parents may have felt very differently, when I went into those spaces, my history came with me. Right. And when I went into those spaces, it was not individualistic, but it was a collective group that I was walking into. Yep. And so she does a great job of expressing that our experiences are very different. Now, I grew up in white America. I did. And I was the only black. So I didn't understand that when I went to Michigan State, a university that was much more diverse than the community Carleton I came from, because, and even in where I came from, when you think about it, there was a black side of town and there was a white side of town. Yep. And, we crossed over the town and integrated pieces of the town. The young people that were in the community were much more open and diverse and open to relationships than, the other people that were in the community. So they couldn't understand the fact that when I came over to visit my friends on the white side of town, that we would get stopped by the police officers and they would ask us questions like, where did you get those bikes from?
Yeah, you don't belong here.
Right. So that is, the difference between dealing with race as an individual and building those relationships to where it's individualistic in terms of dealing with the collective whole. And oftentimes our experiences are much different. Now, let me tell you how history plays a part. When I got to Michigan State University, everybody that I was around, I had black friends that lived on my side of town in Carleton. And then I had white friends who lived on the other side of town. And the school was a place that we would, play sports and basketball. So we didn't have a lot of those issues because we had an opportunity to really, it's a small school. So we had a lot of individual opportunities to interact, right? Now, when I went to Michigan State, Rob, it was so interesting because my first year I lived in West Wilson Hall, 5th floor. It was a swimmer's floor. I'm on the floor, black man with a swim team. So I think other than myself and one Puerto Rican kid out of 126 kids, we were the only two people of color. And he didn't know that he was other. I'll say it that way, because his experiences were different. Right. He grew up in a pool with white America, so he associated more with white America than he did with black America. And this is what we're talking about. Black people are not a monolith, and our experiences that we bring with us and our history that we bring with us really determine how we feel comfortable and how we operate in those spaces. In much the same fashion for everyone. Okay. So we went through this thing Rob, I walked into my dorm, and I brought my roommate was Mike Christina, one of my friends from that we brought from Carlton. He's a good friend of mine for years. So we had a great relationship, and I could never understand the first couple of weeks. He's like, "Hey, have you met the Sweet Mates?" I was like, "They won't talk to me." He's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "They won't say a word to me." And he had went home this weekend, and it just so happens because normally we would close our doors, because our suites, we shared a bathroom, and this particular time our doors were open. He was out of town, and they thought that he was there. So they came over, "Hey, Mike," and they walked in the room, and it was me. And I was like, "Hey, how's it going, guys?" And they were like, "Oh, sorry to say." We're like, No, come on over. Hey, wait. And I introduced myself to them, and we talked. And so they were like, "Oh, okay." And it was very weird. So they were saying, "Hey," I said, "Hey, you guys want to go out and have lunch together?" Because I'm like, we're roommates. We're stuck with each other for a whole year. And they were like, "You want to go to lunch with us?" So we went to lunch, and I sat with them. Now, this is funny. I sat with them, and we were talking, and they were just like, "Why aren't you sitting over there?" Because once again, the cafeteria was one of the most segregated. It was like church on Sunday. Whites were sitting over here, the blacks were sitting over, and I get the fact that you migrate to those who are most like you.
Right.
And also the difference between from Saginaw, Carlton, to going to Michigan State was that all of the individuals that were there had a very different history and an experience that they brought to them on this campus. So he says, after we get to know each other, we become great friends. And he goes, I want to say something to you. I'm like, "Don't be offended." I was like, "What?" He goes, "You're the first black person that I've ever met."
Oh, I've heard that so many times.
And I'm like, going, this is like, this is the 90s. Like, he's like, "You're the first black person that I ever met." And so I didn't know if you were going to shoot me or kill me, or, the only black people I saw were the black people on TV. And I wasn't offended. I thought it was funny because I was more cultured than that. By this time, I've traveled to other countries. But his experience that he brought with him into this situation,
his history,
his exposure, the media expression of who black people were is what he brought to the table. And he encountered and he interacted with me based upon his history. And so as we talk about these concepts of anti-blackness, we have to understand that a person comes into a situation, and this is a very real deal, with a set of understandings, a history, experiences, and really media portrayals of blacks until the recent decade, past 10 years, have not been very helpful, because we were usually the criminal or the one shooting a gun or the one breaking into someone's house or the one, those kinds of things.
The stereotypes have been pushed on people.
Absolutely. And so we began to have this conversation. He goes, "If I had never met you, I probably would have never talked to another black person." And that was amazing to me. And so we began to have that conversation, and he began to ask those questions. Well, Kareem, why is it this way? Why do they do this? And so now we are still fast friends. We connect every now and then, but we've got to begin to understand that there are systems and structures that are in place that are embedded. Race is a social construct,
sure is.
But the beginnings of the teachings of race, we begin this at a very early age. And we begin with when we look in our community, who's in our community? There's no black people in our community. And, we'll talk about some of those things a little bit later, Rob. But as we talk about how race is not real, we begin to understand something that's very important. And I want to say this because I know our time is flying. We begin to understand that also, although that race is a social construct, the existence of blackness is because there had to be an expression or an explanation as to how slavery could ever exist.
Right.
So blackness had to exist so that we could understand that we could dehumanize this individual because they were different. We could be okay with the treatment of these individuals because they were less than. And I need you all to understand, by making black less than, less valuable, less educated, less human, it then gives another complex by default: white supremacy. If blacks are less than, then that must mean that whites are better than. And so we need to make sure that we have these conversations so we can begin to examine these constructs, because they start off at a very basic place with not in intentions of burning anyone's house down or burning crosses, but they exist because they are part of our foundational experience.
And it's important that our own people understand this too, because a lot of our young people don't understand their own history as to why this is so important. It's not a thing about racism per se. It's about understanding, having a conversation, why are you Black? Why are we being treated this way? Why do we treat whites the way we do? Or why we fear them, or why we're afraid of them, or why we even love them the way we do, and vice versa. So it has to have a conversation. And I applaud those young men who came to you and had that conversation, and asked you questions.
How are we doing on time, Rob? Because I want to make sure before we get into this next conversation.
5.
Okay, we got 5 minutes. I want to read another passage in this particular book, and it comes from the same section on anti-racism. It's on page 81. This entire chapter I have just like highlighted like crazy. As a matter of fact, let's go there. So bottom of the bottom of the chapter, page 81, and it says, "Consider the enduring white resentment about the perceived injustices of affirmative action programs." Okay. It says, "There is an empirical evidence that people of color, especially Black people, have been discriminated against in hiring since the ending of enslavement into the present. In the late 1960s, a program was instituted to help ameliorate these discrimination, and it was called affirmative action. There is a great amount of misinformation about affirmative action as evidenced in the idea of special rights. For example, people commonly believe that if a person of color applies for a position, they must be hired over a white person, that Black people are given preferential treatment in hiring, and that specific number of Black people of color, a quota, is then necessary in the hiring process." All right, so we're going to talk. Let me finish this part as well. All the beliefs that are patently untrue. Affirmative action is a tool to ensure that qualified minority applicants are given the same employment opportunities as white people. Moreover, white women have been the greatest beneficiaries of affirmative action, although the program did not initially include them. All right.
Page 90 and 91.
Page 90 and 91. So, Rob, I want to have a really quick question. And I know we're talking about white fragility. And really, this is an area that we've all seen this. I know that you've seen this. I remember when I was going to college and I got accepted to the schools, all of the schools that I applied to. And one of my friends, well-meaning, loving, intended, I love them, Heather, look out. She says to me, and we're great friends right now. She says, "Well, you got in probably because of affirmative action, Jabbar." That's my middle name. And I was like, "What?" I'm like, "Girl, my GPA is higher than yours. My test scores were higher than yours. I'm involved in community." But that was something that I heard a million times over. Now, the system has basically all been thrown out since about 2018. But Rob, when you hear affirmative action, I'm sure you've heard this a million times. What has been, do you understand why white people were so against that process of affirmative action?
Oh, yes, of course. All my life, from the 60s on, I've heard that. I understand that completely. And I've seen the fights about the whole thing anyway.
Okay. And so the thing is this, that if they were going to hire someone, this is one of the key things that
some Blacks don't want it either.
Right. Because they want to say on their own merits. But this is what I think. If a system, and this is what I was sharing with my friend that we had the conversation, do you realize that you inherited something from your forefathers?
Yes.
And if you inherited from your forefathers, that gave you a privilege or a benefit or a head start.
Right.
Every family desires to do that for their children. At least every parent should.
Yeah.
Okay. It's called progress. It's called building generational wealth. And when we look at that, and so the wealth gap is a key thing that we need to talk about. When we look at where we are, every generation of white Americans since slavery have had a benefit that has been passed down to them through generations. That benefit is the thing that when we talk about equity and inclusion, affirmative action was there to level the playing field on the fact that Blacks didn't have corporations, Blacks were not able to own land, all of these different things. And so when affirmative action, something to come in to level the privilege on that system of what do we call it? That system of blessing that passed down, white people didn't want to give up that privilege, and it was a problem. So anything to correct the system, they recognize, I don't want to be disadvantaged, but we should be okay with living in the disadvantage that we have our entire lives. I want you guys to continue to listen to this conversation. Tune in for more United Shades of Gray conversations on race in America. An hour goes by so fast. God bless you all. Grace and peace.